Welcome to the Weird Warriors podcast. I'm Max.
I'm Rich.
Hey, and on this podcast, we normally focus on the Weird War Tales comic book series published by DC Comics from 1971 to 1983. However, this time around, we're taking a trip out to the bayou. We're going on a special mission, a fan-voted special mission, out to the Saga of the Swamp Thing, numbers 82 and 83. But first, Rich has a little something to say to you.
Our intel report, keeping a DC war theme going. Super Soldier, Man of War, published by Amalgam DC Comics in June of 1997. Script by Dave Gibbons and Mark Waid, who signed my copy. Pencils also by Dave Gibbons. Inks by Jimmy Palmiotti. In order to save two universes, the young hero known as Access was forced to use the power of Amalgam. See Marvel vs. DC 1996 number 3. In this issue, the last son of Krypton, Superman, and the Sentinel of Liberty, Captain America, are merged to create the greatest hero the world has ever seen, Super Soldier. Guest starring the All-Star Winners Squadron, All-Star Squadron, Freedom Fighters, Invaders, All Winners Squad, and Sergeant Rock and his Howling Commandos. Pretty self-explanatory. In this World War II story, can't even the super soldier stopped Major Zemo's, Baron Zemo, Major Disaster, new super weapon. Title detail.
Oh, hang on, man. I wanted to chime in and just say I really enjoyed a lot of Amalgam. There was a ton of duds, but the ones that I loved, like this one, were just so much freaking fun. It was like a time when these two companies, because of the trouble they had been in or whatever, would like cooperate and do things together, and it was a fun time. I liked this, and I liked the later kind of more incestuous sort of self-involved tangent project that they did too, where DC just took the names of their characters and did completely new versions of them. These were fun experiments, and there's an Amalgam omnibus out there, and I'm thinking like, I don't need another omnibus, but how long is that thing going to stay in print?
Oh yeah, some of these were just gold. I mean, I bought all of them as they came out. I've got rid of a lot of them also. But yeah, the whole Wolverine Batman crossover was gold. I mean, some of these were really good. I mean, and the fan voted. There's jokes about this. The fans voted on who would win the fight. Between Captain America and Batman,
Oh
or Superman
yeah.
versus what was it, Hulk, I think. And it was just the one against Wolverine versus Lobo was so freaking ridiculous. I mean, it's just like, I'm sorry, there's no freaking way Wolverine is winning that fight. They had to do that one off camera.
I would never bother with reading DC versus Marvel again because of that, because it was just fan voted. And yeah, Lobo and Wolverine was like the last straw for me when that was coming out. But the after effect, Amalgam, that was like 100% fun. Even the crappy ones were like worth it for a read through at the time to go, hey, look at that. They combined Beast Boy with what's his name. Nice. The good ones were really good though. But yeah, DC versus Marvel, the art was all right. That's about it.
Moving on. Title detail. The title was published by DC Comics beginning in May 1982 as the Saga of the Swamp Thing until issue 38 in July 1985. From there, it simply became known as Swamp Thing in issue 39 in August 1985 to issue 171 in October 1996 when the title ended. It became a Vertigo imprint from issue 129 on. Now, recall from last time's teaser that we had a three-way tie when voting was suspended. Swamp Thing, Anarchy, and Where Monsters Dwell. In an effort to be totally impartial and not tilt the scales towards Anarchy to cause Max his well-deserved pain, I took 3/4 of different years, assigned each one to a title, tossed them in a ball cap, and had my wife, Jenny, choose blind. I assure you, she has no favorites and has only listened to the show when trapped in the house when recording was going on. Don't blame her if this episode sucks. Blame yourselves for a three-way tie when I encouraged you to vote as often as you liked.
Yeah, Rich doesn't know that I slipped Jenny $50 to not pick Anarchy because, I could go either way on the other two. But nicely done, Jenny. I thank you.
She laughed when I told her the backstory. Cover detail of issue 82. Art by John Tuttleben. Buck 25. Swamp Thing is yellow and white on red. In the foreground, a GI wearing an ammo belt on his shoulders holds a Thompson and smokes a cigarette. The left side of his face is that of Swamp Thing. Behind our swamp GI, the combat Happy Joes of Easy Company take 5 in the deep woods. Sergeant Rock smokes a cigarette and glances at Swampy. Little Sure Shot Bulldozer and Wildman are also recognized. Cover date, July 1989. Date of release, December 15th, 1988. Old Comics Man, seen on eBay for anywhere between $3 and $11. No Killjoy. Max, what you got?
Well, at first, I'm surprised the back issue goes for so cheap because, as I'll mention later on, this is part of kind of a controversial storyline that maybe I just value it more in my head than others do. But I'll say about the cover, while the drawings are, of course, excellent, the coloring works really well here with the cool blue background letting the figures pop dramatically out at the reader. And knowing Mr. Veitch's actual reverence for the simple charm of 1960s Marvel Comics output, despite what you might think from some of his work, it's very hard for me not to see our half soldier, half swampy foreground figure's face as a nod to Steve Ditko's iconic half Peter Parker, half Spider-Man close-up portraits from his classic founding run on that amazing series. I realize this is a Toddleben cover, but I gotta imagine Veitch had some input, or Johnny T is just on the same wavelength in this regard. High marks for this cover. I am in.
Swamp Thing has always been one of those way out there books that I've never had the slightest interest in reading. I missed this story arc when it came out and discovered it much later when researching other Sergeant Rock crossovers. Swampy has a definite Two-Face vibe going on, which works real well here. He looks all business, and Rock isn't too sure about his newest Joe. I would have had to pick this one up and, at the barest minimum, flip through it to find out what the hell is going on, which is almost always the point. Likewise, good start. And off we go. Brothers in Arms, Part 2. 24 pages. Script and pencils by Rick Veitch. Inks by show favorite Alfredo Alcala. The Earth, screaming shrill hive pandemonium. The Void, naked vacuum barren black hole. No sign of shrapnel wounds on this one. The Green, amorphous, nebulous, untouchable gelatin. The Beyond, polarized, antagonistic, chiaroscuro contrast. Concussion must have got him. I've seen this kind of thing too many times. All the familiar realms unknowable, unlivable, nowhere to turn. Fresh recruit, first patrol, piece of lead falls out of the sky. Only when. And boom, I'm left holding his dog tags. Alexander Holland groans and opens his eyes. Kneeling over him is a senior-ranking sergeant grasping his dog tags. Hey, Pappy, the sergeant says. Hold the meat wagon. This one's still breathing. Behind the sergeant, a pipe-smoking medic cleans his hands. You've been too long without sleep, Frank. I checked his pulse as soon as we found him. The kid's croaked. Anna, Abby. The only thing this kid's croaking out is his sweetheart's name. Rigor mortis. No, really, he's coming out of it. Look at him grab his dog tags. Easy, son. Looks like your unit was hit by a mortar barrage. You're the only one left. What's your name? Holland sits up, holding his blonde head and looking at his tags. My name? It says here that my name is Holland Alexander. Is that right? Damn straight. But if you ask me, anyone that comes back from the dead ought to be called Lazarus. Thanks, Lazarus. By hanging on to those tags, you've made my load a little lighter. Sergeant Rock gets to his feet. Kid's all right, Pappy. See for yourself. Maybe you ought to catch some shut-eye before you tag any more corpses. Easy, grab your socks. We're going home. Easy Company cheers as Pappy comes over to talk to Lazarus. Sorry, Lazarus. I'm kind of new to Easy Co myself. Here, let me check you over. No, I'm fine, really. I'll just stay with the group, if that's okay. Easy moves out, thinking ahead of the party to come. Meanwhile, miles away, a German Kubelwagen pulls up to a freshly bomb-shattered barony. An SS colonel dismounts and views the rubble, which includes a wrecked red triplane. The barbarians must have been after the airfield. Surely they knew that Jagdstaffel was no threat to them. What would the Baron think to see his ancestral estate in ruins, his personal Fokker destroyed, not in aerial combat, but as it sat on the ground? Perhaps he would not be moved. They say he was cold-blooded, a ruthless man. No doubt these qualities were instrumental in his becoming a great warrior. The colonel turns on a flashlight as he descends a stone stairway into a cellar, stopping at a brick wall. Great enough to foresee that the fatherland would rise again from the ashes of the last war, ruthless enough to provide a head to our next hour of need. The officer plants an explosive charge at the base of the wall and takes cover before setting it off with a plunger. Now we shall see what secrets the keep of Castle von Hammer holds. He screams as a wave of rats run him over, knocking him to the ground. Quickly regaining his feet, the flashlight beam captures something skeletal in chains attached to the far wall, dressed in the rags of a French World War I flyer's uniform. Something else, alive, pulsed in the skeleton's lap. A mummified forearm clutching an large orange jewel. The officer hurries over and scoops it up. The claw of Aklund! I feel its radiant power! My Führer! I hold the instrument of our vengeance and victory in our hand! Easyco takes 10 in a wrecked village and draws horns and fangs graffiti on a poster of Hitler while singing, Hitler only has one ball. They'd made it. From North Africa to the Rhineland, they were still in one piece. But Holland has other things on his mind. I am still not sure who was responsible for attacking me. I only remember how suddenly all the familiar realms of existence became unbearable for me. In blind desperation, I explored new levels of reality where I perceived a great rapture through which millions of dying souls poured like blood from a slashed artery. Somehow I was able to focus upon one of those souls and follow its severing lifeline back to its freshly killed body. It was easy to mend this body's wounds enough to function as a vehicle and give me time to figure out where I am. Obviously, I've landed in some war zone that seems to be in Europe, but I was unaware of any large-scale conflicts raging on the continent in this day and age. Holland picks up a discarded Stars and Stripes newspaper. Allies encircle Berlin, the headline blares. But he can't comprehend the paper's May 1st, 1945 date, and Rock bonks him on the head with his fist before he can. How many times you planning on rising from the dead, Lazarus? Never take your helmet off in a combat zone. Never! Take it easy on the kid, Rock, Bulldozer interjects. The war's over. But Four Eyes steps in with grim news. The CO's on the horn. Sounds like he's got a bug in his butt. Easy listens in crestfallen horror to Rock's side of the conversation. No one else available to handle it? How many defenders? Yep, we'll clean them out. No sweat. An avalanche of protests rain down on Rock as he gets off the radio, but he cuts him off. There ain't one of you Joes hasn't saved my ashes half a dozen times. I know how you feel, and if it makes it any easier going down, I feel it too. But we got orders, and I intend to follow them until the Krauts surrender. It ain't over till it's over. Berlin's this way. Grumbling, Easy automatically falls in behind Rock as they head back to the front. The colonel wipes away tears as he stares through the binoculars as a distant pillar of smoke. I was born in Berlin. Now it's burning. The Russians must be at the gate of the city. Dear God, what if they've gotten to the Führer? Be strong, my Führer. I'm coming. The officer opens a trunk on the rear of the car and places the claw of Aklund inside, along with several other artifacts he'd been sent to collect for the perfect moment. The Kristallnacht skull, Caesar's obsidian scepter, a fresh Yeti pelt, the Empress Josephine's jewelry box containing Napoleon's foreskin, and of course, the Spear of Destiny itself. A small trunk full of objects possessing enough occult power to bring the world's armies to their knees. The trick will be not only releasing the power, but controlling it as well. And that will require the last item on my list. I only hope they're ready for me at the slaughterhouse. The men of Easy Company watch the Kubelwagen arrive at the plant from a nearby hill and are incredulous at their objective. You're not going to risk our lives for a bunch of cattle, are you? Use your heads, will you? Germany's back is broken. Her army's starving. Those LCs down there are walking K-rations for the SS. The Krauts are running that glue factory full blast trying to slaughter and ship as much fresh meat as they can. It's our job to stop them. There's a certain hierarchy among the men of Easy Company. The veterans who have fought shoulder to shoulder throughout the war keep to themselves. The grizzled sergeant rules over all. His men fear what he might ask of them, but they respect his warrior's heart and survivor's intuition. But this time he is wrong. I sense more than mere animals in those pens. The men of Easy sense it too, and are reluctant to respond to Rock. I'm going to go recon the joint and figure out how to take it. I need help to cut the wire. Sergeant, I think I should be the one to go with you. Thanks, Lazarus. That's two I owe you. Pappy cut in. You're exhausted, Frank. Why don't I take this one? Forget it. You're the closest thing to a real sawbones Easy's had since Normandy. We may need you yet. Wouldn't mind borrowing that pig sticker of yours, though. Inside the slaughterhouse, the colonel presents himself, the claw in one hand and formal orders in the other, before an SS general who is enjoying a candlelit dinner. The blood sacrifice! It is essential to the spell. I must have it. The general is nonplussed. I assure you, Colonel, the Rhineland stud is safely ensconced in one of my holding pens. Sit down and join me in a delightful repast, and we'll talk business. The colonel jams the orders into the general's face. You were told to have the Rhineland stud loaded on a truck and be ready to move tonight. I must get everything to the Magus bunker before Berlin is sealed off. These orders are signed by the Fuhrer himself. The general smiles. The corporal. Did you know he suffered from flatulence and colitis? Dreadful smelling man. The colonel stiffens. How dare you speak of, because I spent 3 years in the trenches convincing the greasy little cockroach of his destiny. Does he really expect me to help him after he disavowed my influence and took up with that clumsy Aryan cabal? The colonel pulls a Luger out of his coat. If you mock my Fuhrer, you stain my honor, sir. You are a traitor to the fatherland. You stand in the way of the 1,000-year Reich, and so you will die. The general calmly dabs a napkin to his mouth. It's true, as things stand now, I am not yet immortal. I expect to be soon. But even as things stand now, it will take more than your little pistol to drive a stake through the heart of Anton Arcane. Go ahead. Pull the trigger. It will be the easiest way to clear up any confusion about who has asked you to sit at his table. I am still confused, unsure of where or even when I am. But there's no mistaking the taste of pure evil that clings to this place. It is a familiar evil, deeper and broader than the tribal conflicts that play here. It is a true evil, more conscious of itself than the basic human failing, now an institution. The one that says those who are different are our enemy, and for our own security, the enemy must die. Rock knifes an unwary German sentry through a slit in the thick wooden fence. Was that necessary? So they tell me. Rock sighs as he closed the dead guard's eyes. He's startled by the menacing snoring of the largest bull he's ever seen standing before them, sporting a strange emblem on its head. Before he can react, Lazarus steps between the two of them. Don't worry, he isn't going to hurt me. He recognizes the life principle by which I live. This is a special creature, one who has been bred for his exceptionally strong aura. But this pentagram on his head makes me think he is to be a tool of evil in this place. I'm going to set him free. Why don't you return to your men? Sure enough, the bull accepts Holland's gentle pat on the nose as the soldier removes his helmet. I read you. I'll get Easy to storm the gate, you set the animals loose, and in the confusion we'll roll over the Krauts. Good strategy. You may be top kicker material yet, kid. Sit tight and put your damn helmet on. I will, Sergeant. Goodbye and good luck. As cat-light footsteps fade into the night, I turn the full power of my awareness to the evil before me, almost reeling from the raw fear of penned-in animals and the howling efficiency of the death factory about to devour them. I don't know how and I don't know why, but behind it all, I sense him.
The colonel fires 6 rounds from his Luger into Arcane, who barely recognizes their impact. My dear Colonel, you're trying to shoot someone who spent 2 world wars studying the effects of bullets on human flesh. I only wish I was as successful at controlling the aging process as I have been at relegating gunshot wounds to the level of bee stings. Ah, I see you're holding the claw of Aelkund. Did von Hammer give this to you? The colonel's bravado evaporates. I, I unearthed it in the keep of his castle. The Baron was reported shot down over Dresden 3 days ago. Isn't that just like Hans? So sure there was a place for his Teutonic chivalry in modern industrialized warfare. I spent so much effort on your precious Führer, feeding his overblown ego. I cast a number of potent spells to ensure a second European land war. The research I do requires battlefields full of bones, and the first miserable war ended too soon. Arcane opens a window overlooking the slaughterhouse floor. Hideous creatures were hooking themselves up to an assembly line that fed them into a grinding machine. I'm going to call them my unmen. What you see are prototypes cobbled together from whatever body parts I could get my hands on. They may be a little rough around the edges, but I see them as the future of warfare in the next 5 centuries. Arcane steers the colonel to the ground floor. They never sicken of the brutalities of war. They never whine or complain, and they always follow orders. See how gladly they go into the grinder to become nutritious food for their brethren? But think what spice a soldier boy might add to my tasty stew. The colonel is horrified as Arcane slides one of the gliding hooks into the back of his overcoat, and he is scooped off the ground. A call from the CO is waiting for Rock on his return. Easy is off the hook. A couple B-17s had missed their drop over Hamburg and were 10 minutes out with a full load of 100-pounders. But Lazarus is still down there, and Rock hurries to get him. Creeping through the animals' pens, Rock is startled by the sudden appearance of Pappy. "The hell are you trying to pull?" the NCO gasps. "Just looking for my pig sticker, Frank. You never gave it back to me." Angrily, Rock returns the medic's blade. "Here, you're lucky I don't cut you a new swear hole with it. Get out of here and get on that hill." He leaves the medic's warning about the feel of this place behind. Rock soon finds Lazarus slumped against the fence by the door to the factory, dead. For sure this time. Told him twice to wear his helmet. He wouldn't listen, and look what happens. Piece of steel drops out of the sky and boom, I'm left holding his dog tags. Rock doesn't see a tiny green tendril writhe away from the corpse. My arrival in this human body was an act of desperation. My exit is a leap of faith and an act of war. The air raid sirens start to wail, and Rock is forced to leave Lazarus' body behind as he runs for cover. Inside, Arcane is shocked. "Air raid? That's impossible. I paid their cursed protection money." "Somehow, I have arrived in this time and place to which I do not belong. I am not meant to manifest in this here and now. I only hope that does not mean it is impossible." Rock frees the penned animals to give them a chance at escape, something the colonel cannot achieve as he is fed screaming, "Sieg Heil!" into the grinder. To grow a throat from which to unleash a guttural growl takes a superhuman effort. It requires total concentration to create lips with which to scream my pain and violation. Salvos of bombs blow the abattoir to bits. Safe on the hill, Rock laments the loss of Lazarus and shudders at the almost human screams of the cows trapped in the attack. "Arcane!" Swamp Thing bellows as he rips a thick steel door off its hinges. Arcane is amazed. That creature's face! It belonged to that French flyer the Baron pulled from his swamps over 20 years ago. He's returned to avenge that night in the dungeons of Castle von Hammer. Swamp Thing wrenches the grinder apart as he closes in. "I know nothing of castles or dungeons, Arcane. My vengeance is for crimes still uncommitted." If you've somehow forgotten our little torture session, perhaps this will jog your memory. Arcane presents the claw of Aelkund towards Swamp Thing, who screams as he bursts into flame. I have never seen this wizened hand, whose mummified fingers are wrapped around a bit of golden amber, but instantly, painfully, I recognize its power in the very bottom of my soul. There is no way this object and I can exist in this time and space. The elemental's essence vanishes, leaving only a green husk behind. "I saw you die 20 years ago, monster," Arcane cries. What secrets of immortality are yours that allow you to return in this mighty engine of plant flesh? I am truly impressed. I will hunt you down and make those secrets my own, no matter how long it takes. Unlike other humans, Arcane will never allow himself to be impaled on death's bloody hole. Arcane's rant is cut short as he's impaled by the Rhineland stud, which was driven mad by the exploding bombs. The claw goes flying as the beast tosses Arcane onto his back and runs off. You don't think this slight inconvenience will stop Arcane, do you? To someone of my surgical skills, this is but an annoyance. Arcane will live forever! Pappy, carrying the trunk of occult objects from the Colonel's vehicle, watches the bull run off with the laughing Arcane. I got news for you, wise guy. Immortality ain't all it's cracked up to be. Take it from someone who's been there. The medic delivers the trunk to a hidden truck with a squad of soldiers nearby. Good job, Miller, Captain exclaims. Even without the Claw of Aelkund, you've effectively shut down the Nazis' occult option. And just maybe won the war. They sure fell for our phony air protection racket. Miller exhales as he partially peels off the rubber mask to get some fresh air. Another assignment awaits the unknown soldier. But first, he must say his farewells to Rock. I cut new orders with the CO. They're shipping me out. The two men watch Easy roasting the carcass of a huge bull on a barbecue from a distance. You didn't happen to spot the body of a Nazi general with it, did you? The medic asks. Nah, found it on the road alone, stone dead. Rock is worried as he watches his men blow off steam. Tomorrow, they'll be spearheading the next Allied attack east. The war might be over at any moment. Each of us is thinking about the last minute of the last day of the war, imagining where we'll be and what we'll be doing and who we'll be doing it with. Every one of our daydreams ends the same way, with a little piece of steel dropping out of the sky and boom, somebody's collecting your dog tags. Epilogue. Abby Cable is cooking a rabbit over a fire when Jason Woodrue, the Floronic man, steps from the shadows. Abby immediately picks up a burning log to defend herself. Get your psychotic delusions right out of here, she demands. Woodrue shies away from the flames. Please, you needn't be afraid of me. I'm not as confused as I used to be. I'm part of a team called the New Guardians, and we try to help people. But there's been a massive invasion of Earth, and the Bog God's power is desperately needed. The Justice League asked me to locate him. So, I made a systematic search of the green dimension. I thought you ought to know. There wasn't a trace of him anywhere in the green. I believe the Bog God is dead. I'm very happy that you've finally found something you can believe in, Woodrue. I really am. Now why don't you do Alec and me a favor, and please, do it somewhere else. The end.
Part 2? Oh, we'll get to that. Killjoy, History Minute. Page 4, panel 2. Nazi armband on the wrong arm. Page 9, panel 2. Elsie the cow was developed by Borden Dairy in 1936 to symbolize the perfect dairy product and named one of the top 10 advertising icons of the 20th century in 2000. No Killjoy. Rock says a couple of B-17s missed their drop over Hamburg on page 16, panel 4. Assuming the Stars and Stripes Lazarus picks up on page 6, panel 3 had today's date, a dangerous assumption, the British were well inside Hamburg on May 1st. In fact, the city would fall on May 3rd. There wouldn't be a strategic bombing raid on the city under those circumstances. Truth of the matter, most strategic bombing missions had been suspended by this point of the war because there was nothing left to hit. And the Allies hadn't encircled Berlin by May 1st. The Soviets were well inside it by then. Hell, the city fell on May 2nd. And speaking of which, page 18, panel 4, that's not a couple B-17s. That might be a whole bomb group. The preceding panel has Rock holding Lazarus's dog tags. I think they're too small. I know they'd have more info on them than just his name. His serial number, blood type, tetanus inoculation date, and religious preference would also be on them. And World War II tags had a notch in them to hold them in place in a stamping device to transfer the info to medical paperwork. There's a boatload of false info and urban legends out there about what that notch was for, but we don't have that kind of time. They actually appear more accurate on the page 2 splash on the cover and on primarily German panels of the book. It seems like everyone is too bundled up for May 1945. Take the coats off, guys. But the big one for me, page 7, panel 1, for starters. The combat Happy Joe's vizier calling Rock by his first name. Since when? He was always called Rock in the decades of Sergeant Rock comics leading up to this one. Everyone in the military is called by their last name. Half the time you don't even know their first name. I'll excuse the crusty medic calling him Frank because he's Doc and all is forgiven. Now, I looked up all the mystical artifacts the colonel had collected to see if any were real. The claw and spear mentioned in the DCU, but otherwise, no. That being said, I'm going to apologize for this in advance and dive right in. Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled to St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean after losing the Battle of Waterloo. He died on the island on May 5th, 1821, at the age of 51. After his death, an autopsy was conducted, and some have claimed that Francois Carlo Antamarchi, the doctor conducting the autopsy, cut his penis off along with several other body parts. It is unclear whether the cut was intentional or accidental. The alleged penis passed into the possession of Napoleon's chaplain, who smuggled it out of St. Helena to his home on Corsica. It remained in the priest's family until 1916, when Maggs Brothers Limited, a book-selling company based in London, purchased it. In 1924, A.S.W. Rosenbach, a Philadelphia-based bookseller, purchased it. The penis went on display in 1927 at New York City's Museum of French Art. A reviewer present at the exhibition from Time described it as similar to a maltreated strip of buckskin shoelace. Others present considered it to look like a piece of leather or shriveled eel. Rosenbach sold the item to a collector named Donald Hyde, whose wife gave it to John F. Fleming after Hyde's death. Fleming was a bookseller who had been close to Rosenbach. Another collector purchased it and attempted unsuccessfully to sell the penis at an auction through Christie's. After the auction, James Cameron was reading an affidavit about Eric Levine, a collector of items relating to Napoleon, and instead of calling the item a penis, euphemistically referred to it as a certain part. A urologist and artifact collector named John K. Latimer purchased the item in 1977 for $3,000, equivalent to about $15,000 today. His daughter, who inherited it upon his death, she must have been so happy, was offered at least $100,000 for it. The preserved penis was described by Judith Pascoe in the New York Times as barely recognizable as a human body part, and its authenticity is unclear. A documentary that aired on Dead Famous DNA described it as very small, measured it to be about an inch. It is not known what size it was during Napoleon's lifetime. The item's current owner has allowed 10 people to see it, and it has never been recorded on camera. Needless to say, no pictures of that in the album. You can do your own occult research on that particular item because I am out.
Yeah, man, I just want to say, when I heard you say the alleged penis, I was like, did you contact one of my exes to write the script? Like, you dirty dog. All right, moving on.
Can't wait to see what your teaser for this episode is going to be with that little type of information in there. Moving on to the CNC. Love the credits under the title. Swamp Thing, created by Ween and Wrightson. Sergeant Rock, created by Conager and Kubert. As I'm quite sure Max will go into much deeper detail, Rick Veitch was a member of the first graduating class of the Joe Kubert School in 1978. So getting a chance to do a Sergeant Rock story must have really fired him up. Speaking of which, Conager and Kubert and Irv Novick also created The Unknown Soldier, 2-for-1 for Veitch. Like I said, I know nothing about the title character, so I missed the Alec Holland ID nod on page 3, panel 2. Rock giving Holland nickname Lazarus, the next panel in silhouette, is classic. Hitler committed suicide on April 30, 1945. So according to that Stars and Stripes paper, Hitler was already dead, and our SS officers' errands were for naught. Page 14, panel 3. The Baron was reported shot down over Dresden 3 days ago. This might be the first acknowledgement that the Hammer of Hell survived the killer skies of World War I. Enemy Ace War Idol by George Pratt came out in 1990 and portrays von Hammer dying in a German sanitarium sometime after the Vietnam War. The incredible Enemy Ace War in Heaven by Garth Ennis and Russ Heath came out in 2001. I had them both sign my copy, and shows von Hammer climbing back into the cockpit for Germany during World War II. He has to bail out of a crippled fighter over Dachau near the end of the war, which is hundreds of miles away from Dresden. And what he sees there finishes off any faint lingering loyalty he had to the Third Reich. Spoiler alert, he hated the Nazis from go and never flew with a swastika on his aircraft. And it's obvious didn't need to read this story to get the idea for War in Heaven. I like how the story ends with Rock talking about the last minute of the last day of the war. Throughout the original run of Sergeant Rock, it was always hinted that Rock would be killed by the last bullet fired in the war. That story was eventually written in DCU Legacies number 4 in 2010 by Len Wein and Joe Kubert, Snapshot Remembrance. All the DC war heroes gathered during the 1976 bicentennial celebration, and we discover Rock's fate. So a few quick call-outs, and I'll wake Max up. Page 6, panel 1, the vandalized Hitler poster while singing that off-color ditty. All of page 19, where Rock frees the cows, the Colonel gets squished, and Swampy manifests while air raid sirens howl the whole time is very well crafted. And page 22, panel 5, where a general holds up a pink dress and suggests the soldier's next mission might test even his abilities.
Yeah, I would like to see someone write that story because I'm pretty sure they didn't in the original Unknown Soldier comics. But yeah, that would be a good one to see. So since it technically kicks off this whole story, although you really only get one hint from Jason Woodrue in the epilogue there that it does so, I'm going to give you a little bit of info about DC's Invasion crossover for starters here. It was published over 3 issues in December 1988 through early 1989. This crossover and its tie-ins, including these 2 issues of Swamp Thing, bulked up the total number of issues, if you wanted the whole story, to 38. Yes, folks, big dumb crossover bloat has been with us for a long time. The plot of this ponderous affair was basically that a bunch of alien races in the DC universe decide that Earth's preponderance of superpowered metahumans is a capital P problem. So they set their differences aside and decide to, well, invade the Earth. One of the main effects of this event was that it brought certain alien races that previous to this crossover had mainly or exclusively appeared in the 30th century setting of the Legion of Superheroes series. From Invasion and forward, aliens like the Dominators, the Khunds, pronunciation never officially defined, take from that what you will, the Gildishpan, the Durlans, and the Daxamites would be part of the present-day era of DC Comics continuity. Yes, Mon-El from the Legion of Superheroes was a Daxamite that technically appeared in present-day first, Superboy number 89, 1961, but he was sent to the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years at the end of that story, so that really doesn't count. Anyway, the Dominators, who were ostensibly running the show during the invasion, intended on capturing, enslaving, and studying the Earth's metahumans. Metahumans are people with superpowers, for people who don't know the DC terminology, with the goal of unlocking the secrets of those powers for their own purposes. Before they can begin the invasion, however, the Dominators and likely DC editorial staff, or Rick Veitch or whoever, determine that Earth's elementals, especially the Swamp Thing, will be a major impediment to their plans. So, they use a device called the Matrix Disruptor to blast Swampy out of corporeal existence. And it's off to the races, and also to this episode for us. If you want to know more, the Invasion event is on the DC Universe Infinite app. And there's also a whole podcast about it called First Strike, the Invasion podcast. So go nuts. All right, and now for this issue itself. Okay, let's get this out of the way right now. I am a mark for Rick Veitch's art. Everything from his individual drawings to his sense of storytelling, page layouts, and panel designs. I love it all. Add Alcala to the mix, and Veitch's work is only elevated even higher, in my opinion. So I kid you not when I say that every piece of this issue is an art call out for me. I'll focus on a couple for tradition's sake, though. On page 2, the title character's name floating in the rising smoke, wafting up in the background, is a nice touch, and in my mind serves as yet another nod to the classics that Veitch holds dear. This time nodding toward The Spirit by Will Eisner, where that book would always work in the spirit into the background of one of the first shots of the story. Some of Veitch's sense of humor comes through in the, as Rich mentioned, vandalized Hitler poster that kicks off the first panel of page 6. And the full page reveal of Anton Arcane on page 11 is really cool. However, if you haven't been reading this series all along, you'd be hard pressed to understand why this particular guy merits so much real estate for his reveal. That's actually a criticism I have of the entire issue, and perhaps of the series itself. This would be a pretty bad first issue ever of the series for someone to pick up, as Rich could probably tell you. Incredibly pretty pictures aside, very little to no effort is spent to catch a new reader up to who these characters are and why their interactions should carry the weight that the script implies they do. I was only an occasional reader of the series back in the day, having been hooked by the Ween, Wrightson reprints and intrigued, but which I think those were published as the Saga of the Swamp Thing miniseries, and that put the hook in me. And I was intrigued by the early Moore Toddleben issues. The involvement of Veitch, though, drew me back into the book. But I found that it was still very much written for people who never missed an issue, and therefore I would only actually buy an issue if it looked cool enough to warrant showing my buddies the pages later on. In fact, the opening page of this issue itself is perhaps the best example of how bad this issue is at welcoming a new reader to the series. What's going on? Who's speaking? How did we get here? That would be all well and good if some real context was provided later, but it's just not really. I don't mean to sound overly negative here. I don't. Because once you shake off the initial confusion, this story stands pretty darn well on its own merits, I'd say. It's creepy as all get out, with abandoned mansions filled with occult artifacts and skeletal remains, occult engineered livestock, reanimated patchwork human corpses galore, and an unexpected, by me at least, cameo from another legendary DC War Comics character, the Unknown Soldier. Actually, Rich, what was the Unknown Soldier doing here, and why was his support staff so close by? If his identity was to be a secret from Rock and Easy. Whatever. It was cool, that's for sure. Loved the art, enjoyed the story. But this was also a stark reminder that books, being written for longtime fans only, and storylines being written for the trade, are not the super modern trends that some people tend to say they are. And yes, I know trade collections were not common when these issues were published, which only makes this writing style an even worse decision, really. So there's my CNC on that. I guess what we're going to do now is skip over to the next issue, and as is tradition here on the show, Rich is going to hit you with the cover detail for it.
Number 83, art by Rick Veitch, book 25. Swamp Thing is red on white. A red Fokker DR-1 triplane spanks through a stormy, lightning-ripped sky. An eerie, red-eyed vision of Swamp Thing is visible on the roiling clouds. Cover date, February 1989. Date of release, my birthday, January 12th, 1989. Old Comics Man, seen on eBay for anywhere between $5 and $10. No Killjoy, and I'll lunge into the CNC. This cover makes even less sense than the first one did. What's Swampy doing in the clouds? What can Enemy Ace possibly do against him? Is there a conflict here, or does Von Halmer even see him? It's a good thing this is a backward flowing story, because I might have missed this one if I weren't already looking for it from part 2. Of the two, this is the easy loser. It's not bad, but it's far from great. Maybe if I knew more about Swampy's abilities, this would work more for me.
My CNC for the cover is as follows. As an image taken on its own, I like this cover quite a bit. Even if you don't know a thing about the series, the image of a tiny airplane heading toward a massive, apparently sentient thunderstorm cloud crackling with lightning bolts would certainly grab my attention. In fact, I'd like to mention here that the covers of both of these issues would have been perfectly good fits for our beloved Weird War Tales series. Also, since this cover is by Rick Veitch, and not the interior team of Mandrake and Alcala, I I get to say that I think this is yet another tribute to the classics of comic book imagery from Ricky V, this time tipping the cap to the Golden Age trope of showing the protagonist or antagonist as an unrealistically large figure on the cover or the splash page of a story, symbolizing the character's influence or impact rather than representing their actual physical stature. I dig it. So, since Rich took the lead on the previous story, I'm going to take the lead on this one. It is called Brothers in Arms, Part 1. It's 24 pages long. Script by Rick Veitch, pencils by Tom Mandrake, inks by Alfredo Alcala. Synopsis starts off like this. Dear Josip, do you still live and breathe? I have no idea as I pen these lines, for here in Germany, all news of the Austrians' invasion of our homeland is little more than Prussian propaganda. Only one thing is certain. Until hostilities cease, the children and I are stranded behind the borders of our enemies, humbly dependent upon the graciousness of my cousin, the Baron. I had not seen my cousin Hans since we were small children, and it was only after accepting the hospitality of his manor for over a week, and under the most extraordinary circumstances, that I finally made his reacquaintance. Aniela and I had taken Grigori on a walk in a swampy, wooded area behind the estate in hopes of escaping the constant drone of the Baron's Jagdstaffel, when a wild beast stepped into the path. A timber wolf, larger than any I'd ever seen in our own country, and behind it, another predator. It was my cousin Hans, the one they now call the Hammer of Hell. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the engine of a French aircraft flying low overhead. The plane burst into flame, and yet he stood his ground as pistons and valves devoured each other, and burning men screamed unholy epithets not 20 feet above our heads. Then it fell, exploding with a hideous finality into the sodden marsh nearby. With words curiously empty of emotion, he asked me to go to the airfield and have Corporal Schmidt bring an ambulance, before turning and coolly wading into the flaming peat and wreckage. When I returned with the ambulance, it was to find Hans standing over a pile of blackened cloth and flesh, studying it with a detached fascination. I could not bear to hear the pitiful cries without thinking how this might one day be you, Joseph, your beautiful body lying violated on some faraway killing field. To the Baron, it only seemed another day's work. He's only 10 years younger than I, but when I endeavored to reintroduce myself, he was stiff and uncomfortable, and he apologized for not being a good host. It was a struggle to engage him in civil conversation, and his features only lightened when he spoke of those whose lives he had clawed from the sky. They were brave men. They must have carried extra fuel and flown at treetop level for 100 miles, all to bomb my Jagdstaffel. A pity I could not save the other pilot. Half of me is still hearing the screams of dying cattle, while the other half tastes the soul as soon as it hits the mire. In one time and place, I'm seething to wring the neck of my greatest enemy. In another, awakened clay crackles with my electromagnetic essence. Part of me dissolves before a chip of amber wrapped in a withered claw. Part of me attempts to manifest in a time and place I do not belong. In another era, I die. But here, I must live. This one, damaged badly. Much worse than the last one. Nipped the bones, stitched leaking organs, but can't think straight. Von Hammer is amazed when the second French pilot breaks the surface of the water and staggers ashore. But even the Hammer of Hell feels a chill of horror when he sees the pilot's face. The whole left half a green mass of plant material with a large red eye. The Frenchman sees the white-haired woman standing beside the German pilot and struggles to speak. Oh, Abby. No, my name is Anais. How do you say that, man? How would you pronounce that?
I got nothing. Ane,
Yeah,
Aeneas, Ane. I was
Anais.
thinking Ane, but
Yeah.
however
I'm
you
gonna
want to do
say Annie and I'll explain it. Hang on. Okay, so we don't know how to pronounce this character's name, and it's Anais. So to avoid the obvious parallel, I'm gonna call her Annie in the script, okay? Say, no, my name is Annie, Annie Arcane. The Frenchman collapses from his wounds and is soon also being placed in the ambulance by the medics. Annie follows it back, leaving the Baron to gaze wistfully at a swirling dogfight overhead. My dearest Josip, once again, I take pen in hand, not knowing if you've survived the Austrians' barbaric rape of Belgrade. As always, I fear the worst and hope for the best. I'm afraid there has been another problem with Anton. It was at the behest of the dean of his medical school that I had traveled to this country. There were certain things he felt that could not be conveyed in a letter. The dean was agitated, and after a brief introduction, read a long list of complaints about Anton's behavior. He began with Anton's generally bad attitude and slothful appearance, then mentioned something about unethical surgical experiments before charging our son with sadism, drug addiction, necrophilia, moral turpitude, depravity, derangement, and decadence. He ended with a long technical discourse on why it was impossible to reanimate a dead body. Our eldest had been expelled from his studies and was last heard heading for the Western Front. Was it we who failed him, Joseph? Or is it this war that turns our children into violent, raving psychopaths? For all my doubts about militarism, I was quick to ask the Baron to use his connections, not only in locating Anton, but also in obtaining the paperwork necessary to traverse the jammed roads and checkpoints on the way to the front. Anton's commanding officer directed me to the triage tent. It is the place where the suffering, whose wounds are beyond medical science, are sent. I found him bent over some screaming wretch, working furiously, and it gave me a small taste of pride to see him trying to help those who were beyond all help. He was surprised to see me, and hurriedly covered up his patient from my eyes. He was hungry to declare his independence, and I was just as desperate not to let him go down the dark path he'd chosen. I'd been grasping at straws with the story of the French pilot, but it worked. Anton agreed to evaluate our cousin's patient. The Baron was gone as usual, flying endless sorties with untrained pilots as wingmen. The poor Frenchman was strapped to his cot in the infirmary, covered in bandages. In his brain-damaged state, he existed in almost superhuman strength, which necessitated his being restrained. But there was a particular light that shone from his one red orb as Anton leaned over. The light of recognition. Beloved Josip, news of the Servian evacuation to Corfu reached us yesterday. But maddeningly, there was no word from you. Were you among those who escaped the brutal Austrian assault? Or are you floating face down in the Danube as I write these words? I shouldn't think such things when there is good news to report. Anton is so intrigued by the French pilot that he has decided to stay with us here at the Baron's estate. He spends many waking hours poring through the extensive medical collection of the von Hammer family library. But I find myself fearing some of these ancient artifacts might turn up missing, and dear Anton might be implicated in their theft. A mother likes to know her son has friends, but the Oriental gentleman who arrived each evening was swarthy and secretive, while a young corporal named Adolf suffered some bowel problems of a serious sort. Anton seems to live for those precious few hours when the regular nurse is gone, and he has the Frenchman for himself. He says the poor man has the most amazing recuperative powers. The master of the manor also holds a keen interest for the Frenchman. In the month I have been forced to accept the Baron's hospitality, I have spoken to him only rarely. It seems to require an event of extreme importance to drag him down from the sky. In this case, he hoped to rekindle the spark of intellect in the wounded man by bringing him to the Jagdstaffel to again witness the miracle of flight. For whatever reason the Baron took the poor man aloft, his condition was unchanged. In fact, he continued in his most particular form of delirium, confusing us with those he had deeply cared for in his past life. Me especially. It was all quite pathetic, and I'm sure one of the reasons the Baron ended up going along with Anton's mad scheme. That, and the nightmares. Often, I was woken by the Baron's screams. When Anton was able to provide a potion that allowed him to sleep soundly without affecting his performance in battle, the Baron was eternally grateful. Thus was Anton able to gain the wary Hans's confidence, not an easy task. Perhaps Anton skipped too quickly over the unorthodox surgical techniques the operation would require, but in the end, the Baron nodded his assent. Can't think. Want to scream. Can't do that either. Not in control of this body. My friend, you are the most amazing specimen I have ever laid a scalpel on. I'm certain it was benevolent fate that brought us together. Who are you? How do you sculpt with vines and roots to recreate flesh and muscle as fast as I peel it away? I've been waiting for you, my friend. I don't know who or even what you are, but of one thing I am quite sure. You and I shall go far together. I know him. He was my greatest enemy in another time, another place so far away.
What has befallen you, Joseph? Are you under Prussian guards at some makeshift prisoner of war camp, or buried in a stinking mass grave along the Adriatic coast? We've been told over 200,000 men in the Alsace-Lorraine perished in a single day of mechanized carnage. In the western sky, miles above the trenches, the war is acted out in mythic proportion, the players mining a melodrama that speaks of ancient chivalrous societies gone mad. On any typical day, the Baron will fly a dozen sorties or more, the new victory cups arriving with Teutonic efficiency the following morning. The personal cost he keeps hidden behind an impassive death mask, his eyes like two dams holding back foaming Niagaras of unfelt emotion. Soon Anton's potions no longer guarantee his sleep will be free of nightmares. My own dreams are an endless search, wading through heaps of cold cadavers, clamoring over what was once the flower of European manhood, now but a landfill of broken bodies and shattered faith. Finally, I see you, Joseph, waving from across the steaming river of coagulated red, and you smile with the face of the mutilated Frenchman. Then I'm fleeing that horrible continents, tripping and sliding over corpses stacked like cordwood, till one of the dead, out of all the slaughtered thousands, catches my gaze. It was you, Joseph, now nothing but fodder for the flies. I bolted awake, and fear-pumped adrenaline fuels my search of the castle for Anton. His bed was unslept in, the library and museum looted. How I cursed myself for trusting him for even a minute. That's when I heard the scream. I followed the echoes through chambers laid in place by Reformation Lutherans to a small grotto. The Frenchman, now fully in plant form, was chained to the wall, and Anton stood before him inside a candlelit pentagram wearing a loincloth. You are not responding, Anton screams. Not to the spells, not to the books. Are you just playing stupid? Are you foolish enough to attempt to trick Anton Arcane? Or are you truly the mindless mound of moss I see before me? I've worked on thousands of corpses, Frenchman, and never have I seen anything to compare to you. Your body is made up of nothing but vegetation. It's so perfect, so efficient. You may indeed be immortal, but you don't understand what a privilege it is to live forever. How fortunate for me that I possess the one thing that might very well make you understand. This! Anton shows the Frenchman the claw of a clunt in the chest, and the pilot screams as he bursts into flame. Yes! When you see it, you burn! You don't like it, do you? Annie storms around the corner. Anton, in the name of all that is holy, desist! Mother? Damn it! Can't you see I'm... Yes, Anton, I see very clearly. I bore you and once loved you with all the feelings of my breast, but now I see what a loathsome, despicable specimen of humanity I have brought and nurtured into the world. I finally understand why a man like Baron von Hammer must divorce himself from all feeling and compassion. It's the only way one can find the strength to rid the world of gutter animals like yourself. Anton flings the trunk away and pulls out a curved dagger from his loincloth. You want animal? I'll show you animal. I'll show you how Anton Arcane stands above all men in their petty morality. And women, too. He grabs Annie and raises his blade. You've arrived at the perfect moment, Mother. Your son's spells fail for lack of sacrificial blood. Von Hammer steps into view, holding a rifle. Put her down, he says in a calm, icy tone. I will not see my ancestral home stained by your black arts, cousin. Anton shields himself from Von Hammer with his mother. This is a family dispute, nothing to trifle a soldier boy who should be out mowing down the country's enemies like all the flesh and blood automatons. For God's sake, Annie pleads, he is the enemy of all who live. I beg you, Hans, kill him! Kill him now! Slut! You'll die for that! Von Hammer fires and blows a massive hole through Anton's body, sending him gurgling onto the pentagram. You, Arcane's mother? The Frenchman asks. Aine hurries over and places her hand on his cheek. Oh, my poor man, can you ever forgive the crimes committed upon you by my son? His evil, all-consuming, only is it infancy. You bear no fault. Is there anything we can do for you? Yes. Open the chest. Let me gaze upon what it holds. I know this object, von Hammer exclaims as he opens the chest. My father took possession of it under the most extraordinary circumstances on a trip to America. Its origins were in great antiquity. What power has this thing over you? Don't understand it yet myself. Only know it can somehow send me on my journey. Aine takes the claw and brings it close to the Frenchman. The vegetation begins to dissolve, leaving only a skeleton. Thank you. You are as beautiful as your granddaughter. The poor mutilated man suffered his illusions to the end. Do you think he found peace? Perhaps. His secrets shall remain here in the keep of Castle von Hammer until they may be needed. I will have the workmen erect a wall tomorrow. As for Anton, we'll have to go to the magistrate with his remains. But Anton's body is gone, a blood trail disappearing into the dark. The children and I will be staying at Uncle Vacislav until it is safe to return to Castle Arcane. My letters to you are left unposted, the memory of our life together fading like a daguerreotype left in the winter sun. The Baron wasn't there to see us off, of course, but his squadron buzzed overhead in the dead man's formation, his blood-red tri-wing dropping out and away in a salute to a fallen comrade. At first I didn't understand. Then the messenger handed me a black-bordered telegram, and I knew. I did not cry or clutch our remaining children. I did not gnash my teeth or curse my fate. Hans von Hammer has taught me the skill a human being needs to survive in an inhuman world. Like a good soldier, Joseph, I did not feel a thing. And the telegram reads, Your king extends condolences. Your husband, the Vice-Count Joseph Arcane, gave his life to king and country while leading his mounted cavalry against armored tanks during the siege of Belgrade. Epilogue. Chester walks through the woods, concerned with the dead fish and dying plants on the riverbed. When he sees Abby shaking her fist and screaming at nothing. I don't care who you are, how far you've come. I don't believe you. Only she can see the phantom stranger hovering nearby. I have walked every inch of the afterlife. Swamp Thing was not to be found in heaven or hell or any point in between. He then flies away, leaving Abby to the consolation of her friend. The end. Killjoy History Half Minute. For the record, Jogstava was misspelled in two different ways in both books. Belgrade was lost to the Austria-Hungary Empire and recaptured in 1914, and fell again in 1915 with the help of Bulgaria. A costly retreat followed that resulted in the Serbian army being reorganized on Corfu in 1916. The hints of this history are in the letters that Annie writes. But the Fokker DR-1 triplane didn't fly until 1917, same for German-designed tanks becoming operational. So there are some holes here that a little research could have corrected. Easier said than done in the pre-Google era. A shorter C&C for this one. Hey, Conger and Kubert also created Enemy Ace. Beach is just living the dream. Fast first gripe. What is Von Hammer doing hunting still wearing this flight helmet? Take it off, you look like a schmuck wearing it on the ground. The last panel on page 5, we get the horrifying Two-Face look we were teased on last issue's cover. Page 7, panel 7 shows one of Von Hammer's adversaries, St. George, an English ace that flew in a suit of armor, Star Spangled War Stories 147. The killjoys of weight aloft and being able to turn your head to see behind you in flight go without saying. The last two panels on page 8 of Arcane hacking away on German wounded with a saw, a bucket of gore at his feet and flies buzzing overhead, makes your lip curl a little bit. Actually, that whole page is outstanding with the descriptions of conditions as Annie approaches the front. An interesting side note of panel 1, page 9, as Arcane conceals his work from his mother, the left hand has at least 6 fingers. An artistic whoops or something Arcane did. Nice Hitler nod on page 11, panel 6, though I don't know who the Oriental gentleman is unless you know, Max. Page 13, panel 1. Hammer's sweat-soaked nightmare of jumping wreathed in flame from his burning plane as he's shot down is excellent. No shoots back then, remember? Page 15, panel 1. The only recurring adversary of the enemy ace makes an appearance, the French ace, the hangman, who flew in an executioner's hood with a noose around his neck. Ah, the 60s. And panel 4 of the same page, the Kubert glare of enemy ace 2. Great. Most of the theme of this issue was via letter writing, and the way Veitch described the horrors at the front was stellar. This was a very good part 2.
Yeah,
Part 1.
before, yeah, part one, yeah, with the reverse countdown. Before I moved to my CNC, I had a couple of things about yours that I wanted to chime in on. First of all, like about the enemy ace's flying helmet, his combat helmet or whatever. I've always really liked the look of it, but why would any flight helmet of its, but would any flight helmet of its time actually have those wild, flappy bat ear-like things up at the top? I mean, I wouldn't change them for the sake of accuracy or anything, of course. But are they more costume design than uniform here on Von Hammer? Like, did any helmet ever look like that? You don't know?
I'm not 100% spun up on the flying outfits
Okay.
of the
Yeah.
Germans during World War One. I mean, I have to assume that there must be something based in history. Maybe a couple
Yeah.
pilots flew like that. Maybe the Red Baron did something like that. I honestly,
I just didn't
I
do
don't
it
know.
so much as even a simple Google image search, but I've always really dug how it looks like devil horns or whatever flapping up off his head. So
Oh,
cool
it's a
enough.
great look when he's in when he's in the cockpit,
Yeah.
but when he's on the ground walking around hunting, dude, just take it off.
Yeah, it's part of his costume though. He is a comic book character after all. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I really loved the guy in the suit of armor and flying a plane and the dude with the noose around his neck and a hood flying the plane. It was like shades of the cooler airboy slash, air fighters elements from the golden age, but especially from that 80s Eclipse comic series written by Chuck Dixon. I think there's some art by Tim Truman in there. I read every issue of that when it was coming out. I'm sure these characters were from the Air Fighters comics or whatever. I mean, I know that they're probably DC properties, but stuff like that was all through that Airboy series and combined from the Golden Age Air Fighters series from the 40s were all mixed together in that 80s Airboy comic. So just wanted to highly recommend that because it's full of crazy stuff like that, all squished into one series. So, moving on to my actual CNC, I'll say that I'm agreed very much on the letter writing device and how well it was utilized here. Most times when a comic book tries this kind of thing, you can save time and sanity by just skipping the letter portions entirely, as they're often hard on the eyes and the writer just uses them as an excuse to overindulge in their delusions of crafting a work of literary fiction. Here, however, Veitch walks the tightrope well, keeping the letters informative and inducing them with a polite correspondence style that never truly drowns the proceedings in a surplus of pretension. On the art front, Tom Mandrake puts in an able effort to maintain the look of the series without completely trying to ape Veitch or Toddleman's styles. And Alcala's inks do a lot of the lifting for that function anyway. However, Mandrake's art is still a little more cartoony in a superhero comic book kind of way than Veitch's, and occasionally that just can't be helped. The biggest example of stylistic dissonance for me can be seen on the cover of the Necronomicon in panel 2 of page 11. It's the Book of the Dead for kids. For the most part, though, this book looks the part it's supposed to. And Mandrake is no slouch with the storytelling, the page designs, or panel layouts either. If I was a subscriber to this series back in the day, I wouldn't have been mad about this new art team at all. As for the story, I say we have something on our hands here that would have fit very well into or as an issue of Weird War Tales, with the same caveat that I'd put on the previous issue that some tighter expository work would be needed to make it stand on its own. The obvious but still unexplained, long-standing enmity between Swampy and Arcane being perhaps the biggest area nominated for such rework. Other than that, this is a great example of a gothic horror story in comic book form. You got family drama with mysterious, reclusive relatives, dark, disturbing progeny, and a hapless innocent stuck between it all, as the horror only swirls thicker around her with every turn of the page. Yeah, this one was a banger, in my opinion. And while it still kind of falls flat for folks who haven't been reading the series all along, I got a pretty good kick out of seeing Abby Arcane giving some hell to the Phantom Stranger in the epilogue. It was pretty funny. I like that. That's it for the story content of both issues, folks. So, what are we going to do now? We're going to cherry pick from our favorite spotlighted ads out of either one of the issues. And since I went on a ramble about DC's Invasion crossover, I had to pick a full page ad for Legion 89. It's got the team here standing all assembled, a bunch of people you may or may not recognize. You got a big person made of rock in the background, an orange-skinned woman standing in the front row, some dude with a Wolverine-like haircut, a blue-skinned woman for fans of the Legion of Superheroes might recognize as someone from Shadowlass's planet. You got a green skin guy again. If you're a Legion fan, you're thinking, is that Brainiac 5? Over on the far right, you've got a hooded figure with little tentacles coming out that is going to end up being a Durlan, and a very important one later on. Spoiler alert to Legion of Superheroes fan. It says up top, Destiny made them a team. Time will make them heroes. 1,000 years before the Legion, there was Legion with L period E period G period I period O period N period acronyms. They're annoying. Legion 89, brought to you by Giffen, Grant, Kitson, and DeCarlo. Forged in the fires of the invasion, a new team emerges to protect the galaxy. An ongoing series in new format beginning in January. Now, this, as I mentioned in my overview of the Invasion crossover, this is part of one of those effects, maybe the mandates of even the Invasion crossover, was to bring some of that Legion of Superheroes heat into the current DC Universe timeline. Because the Legion book takes place 1,000 years in the future. So a lot of the aliens, like the Durlans, the Kaluans, which, Brainiac 5's one of, and other character strata in the background. The big person made of rock, that's another alien race from the Legion of Superheroes. They're like a silicon-based life form. I believe they're from the planet Dryad. To bring them into current continuity, this series was perhaps the flagship of the after effects of the Invasion crossover. This brought a lot of what was going on in Legion books into current DC continuity. And it also, though you don't see him in the ad here, brings back a member of brings back a character that was part of let's see, like some minor character that debuted in the Omega Men. A little guy named Lobo ends up being an unwilling member of this team. So it was another home base for a character that would prove to be a breakout in the late 80s, early 90s. And to this day, because I hear Jason Momoa is going to be playing him in the Supergirl movie that's coming out next year. Here you have the ad that I had to pick because of all the invasion nonsense bundled up in this Swamp Thing storyline. This was like the team that really was the after effect of the Invasion crossover in DC Comics publishing history. And it went on for quite some time. It went on to be Legion 9091. It changed title to Rebels, and I think ran to like 93 or so, or maybe even later than that. I jumped shortly after it switched over to Rebels, and all of these original creators were long gone. So I didn't stick with it for the entire run, but for most of it, especially when Giffen and Grant were still involved, I did hang on, and it was a great series. I haven't looked because I have a bunch of them, but I hope that this series is largely available on the DC app. Go check it out. And that's my ad. What you got, Rich?
Another episode of the show where nothing called my name, so I settled. Both issues have a full page ad of Warner Brothers swag with Bugs Bunny and Porky Pig shilling for the 5 items on display: sweatshirt or t shirt, coffee cup, ball cap, keychain, and necktie. Be the voice on your block, Doc, to order these fantabulous Looney Tunes items. Don't forget to call, folks. 1-800-223-6524, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 PST. Free Warner catalog. with purchase. The tie has just Bugs on it. Everything else has Bugs, Tweety, Porky, and Sylvester posing behind the WB shield. And gotta say, there's nothing on the page I need to have. Maybe if there was some Foghorn Leghorn or Roadrunner and Coyote, I might bite. Daffy, even. Come on, folks. Still, it made me stop and look, so it gets the win.
Yeah, you picking that ad, first of all, is perfect because you are the person I know with the most Looney Tunes dialogue memorized. And also, it made me just wistful for that brief period in time when we had those Warner Brothers stores in the malls. I would always stop in there, even though I hardly ever bought anything, and at least go through all the animation cells. So, nostalgia.
So, do we have any last words? Because I'm committed, or because I should be. I worked on the script during downtime while in Wisconsin for a family wedding. I should start keeping track of states I've taken the show. These are the only 2 issues of Swamp Thing I've ever bought, and odds are excellent they will remain that way. It's just not my style. The going backwards in time thing was a neat ploy. This was fun and introduced me to a side of DC I very rarely visit. I reserve the right to do an Enemy Ace special mission at some point. Issue 82 was the early favorite, but 83 grew on me as I did the scripting. Finding stories like this from the late 80s and early 90s, once the title books of the DC War Heroes were canceled, turned into a real guilty pleasure. This was a keeper.
Yeah, hey, I gotta say, the gothic romance vibes of issue 83 just barely edge out the raid on the Devil's Slaughterhouse action of 82. But it's a close race for me. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this storyline is far more infamous for its ending, or rather for its lack of one, than it is for any connection that it has to the invasion event. See, Swampy's journey back through time here was going to climax with the titular bog monster meeting Jesus Christ, the one from Nazareth and all. The script was initially approved, but then canceled entirely when editorial got cold feet. Veitch was pissed off enough by this move to quit the book and to vow that he would never work for DC Comics again. He kept that promise until Jim Lee sold Wildstorm Studios to DC much later on, and both Mr. Veitch and Alan Moore found themselves technically and briefly working for their old adversary once more. Now, as we may have alluded to at the beginning of the episode, and as I'm pretty sure we've mentioned on the show before, I have actually met Rick Veitch in person. It was at the first comic book convention I ever attended, grâce à Monsieur Fulham in Albany, New York. Veitch had a long line at his table, mostly made up of folks who wanted Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sketches from him, as he had just finished a stellar stint on the Turtles title, which I had actually read and enjoyed. However, by the time I had gotten up to see him, I had noticed a bunch of original art pages that he seemed to actually still be working on just behind his chair. I asked what those were all about, and he dismissed the rest of the line behind me, saying he was breaking for lunch. So I was going to be the last person he saw before he broke. As it turns out, those pages were part of what was to become the Brat Pack series from Veitch's own yet-to-be-launched King Hell Press. We talked about that project, he showed me some art from it, and I asked for a sketch of the guy in the zipper mask, who was in fact Dr. Blasphemy, the main antagonist of that miniseries. While he was working on the sketch and taking his lunch, he invited me to stay seated and ask him whatever questions I felt like. Well, I knew right away what I wanted to know. I asked, what was it like being part of the first graduating class of the Joe Kubert School of Comic Art? Mr. Veitch then proceeded to tell me stories about that time in his life, the details of which I was too giddy to remember much of even as I walked away from that table. Pretty good start to my comic convention career, eh? Only upwards from there, I'm sure. So there we have it. Like that was just one hell of a way to start my comic book convention attending career. And I'm still looking. I know that sketch is somewhere in this house. I better not have misplaced it. I haven't found it yet. But when we find it, it's going to be a picture of it in the album. All right. So that's it, folks. That's the episode. That's the special mission. That's our detour into the boggy waters of the saga of the Swamp Thing, with a whole lot of guest stars from our beloved DC war books showing up in the meantime. So now we're at the end of the show. This is the scuttlebutt where I mention, hey, we got a kick-ass Facebook page, Weird Warriors Podcast Facebook page. We've got merch on redbubble.com. Buy some of that, take a picture of it, send it to the Facebook page via Facebook Messenger, and you might get a Sam Star because Rich is a super nice guy. We are also uploading our episodes to YouTube as we speak. I'm going to do some of that today. And who knows, by the time this episode comes out, there might be a whole lot of them up there. I'm making some progress. But other than that, that's my bit for the scuttlebutt, people. But Rich, he has a little something extra to give you, as he always does. It's a teaser for our next episode.
Weird War Tales number 71. Endless War, Endless Greed, and a horrifying account based on a true story that is easily the most chilling tale we've ever told here. This one's going to be a downer, but tune in anyway. It's worth it. Veterans Day is around the corner.
I can't wait. And you guys won't have to. By the time this comes out, this will be coming up soon. And and what'll that be? It'll be an episode of the Weird Warriors podcast. Who's it going to be brought to you by? It's going to be brought to you by me and that guy Rich over there. We're the Weird Warriors. We're the Batlin Bros. This, as I mentioned, is the Weird Warriors podcast, and that's a podcast on which we promise to make war
No more.